You're watching Scriptease. In today's episode, we'll be finishing our discussion on the screenwriting of Paul Schrader by looking at First Reformed. It's highly recommended you watch the previous video about Taxi Driver first. You can expect spoilers for the whole film and mature themes. Last episode, I concluded by saying that Schrader's elaborations on a character's mindset form the basis for his use of transcendental style. Transcendental style can be thought of as a filmmaking form which aims to evoke a spiritual experience in the viewer. That may sound kind of loosey-goosey, but the key conceit of transcendental style is pretty simple. By slowing down the pace of a film, you allow the audience more chance for reflection. This can provoke deeper thinking about the film's themes, contemplating how the film relates to the viewer, or delving into the characters' psyches. A normal film, so to speak, doesn't want to slow down the pace. It relies on unfolding action to keep you hooked in, to get you invested in the characters and their stakes. The trials of the characters evoke empathy, and you find yourself rooting for them to win, even if you're not consciously aware of why you want them to win. As Schrader puts it,
most films lean into the viewer, desperate for the viewer's attention. They grab us by the lapels. They hold us tight. They show us pictures of beautiful people and exciting action. And all the while, they play music, so we know how to feel every single moment. Contemplative films, on the other hand, lean away. They challenge the viewer to lean forward, to become part of the film's journey, to become active rather than passive.
Transcendental style films do the exact opposite. They withhold entertainment. They present tableaus, long shots, minimalist soundtracks, all so that you have time to ask that key question. Why? Why am I focusing on this scene for so long? Why are the characters on screen doing what they're doing? Why is the scene framed like this? Once you begin to question why, you'll start to see the delicate strings with which the filmmaker has tied their story together. And this appreciation for detail, meaning, motivation, that's where the enjoyment of transcendental style comes from. It's like meditation, it can't be rushed. The film's engagement becomes a delicate balance. Lean too far in and the audience won't have any time to reflect. Lean too far back and the audience loses engagement. They become bored. If you're still not entirely certain what I mean, here's an example from an unlikely source. Neon Genesis Evangelion, specifically the infamous elevator scene. 53 seconds of a 22-minute episode devoted to a single shot of Asuka and Rei in an elevator. They stew in this uncomfortable silence, forcing us to ask, why? Why won't they talk to each other? Why does Asuka seem so desperate to ignore Rei? And why does Rei not seem to care? Of course, if you've seen the episode, you'll be equipped to answer these questions yourself. But if you want a detailed breakdown, then please check out Super Eyepatch Wolf's excellent video on the topic, link below. My point is, holding on a shot recontextualizes its meaning. I've always felt that most of Schrader's films exhibited transcendental style, yet Schrader doesn't agree with this.
I like spiritual films. I had written about them, but had no interest in making one myself. I was too intoxicated by action and empathy. Occasionally, someone would attempt to connect my films with the transcendental style I had written about, and I would say, no, that's not me. You'll never catch me skating on that thin Braconian ice.
He feels as though his earlier films still used motion and action to draw the audience in. Scenes like the bloody shootout in Taxi Driver certainly support this outlook. It could be that I'm just so used to modern films, fast-paced, desperate to hold your attention, booming soundtracks and crashing visuals. When I watch the slower pace of an older film, it triggers that same introspective response that Schrader describes as being the goal of transcendental style. In Taxi Driver especially, I find the scenes of Travis alone in his apartment stir self-reflection. Perhaps it's simply a scale. Modern films lean further in, older films lean away, and films that more strongly exhibit transcendental style lean even further away again. Schrader's first deliberate attempt at transcendental style is First Reformed.
And I was having a conversation with Pavel Pawlowski, who had done Ida. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about spirituality in film and the new economics of film. And I walked home to my apartment in New York, and I said, it's time. It's now time to write that script you never thought you would write. You never said you would write.
First Reformed follows Reverend Tola, a priest suffering depression and losing his faith in God, as he struggles to find meaning in his life. The film necessitates pondering on grand themes: hope, despair, religion, commercialization, environmentalism, martyrdom. Schrader employs transcendental style to coax the viewer into reflection on these behemoth issues. Using his experience as a filmmaker, almost 50 years, Schrader finally completed his passion project, the intersection between his love of filmmaking and the ingrained reasoning of his religious upbringing. Let's take a look at the script for First Reformed. From the very first page of the script, we have numerous links to Schrader's technique in Taxi Driver. Whilst we don't have the page-long description of Toller that Travis received, Schrader does still open with a contracted description. His face like a half-rubbed-away engraving on those tombstones, revealed in degrees of shadow. He is in agony. Toller, like Travis, is a troubled character. There is confliction that roils inside of him, that is worn on his face. Schrader uses a capital A for agony, linking to a mention of agony in the Bible. In Luke chapter 2 verse 44, Jesus prays before the Last Supper in which he knows he will be betrayed. Aware of the sacrifice he's about to make, he still decides to take this burden upon himself. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. This verse paints how Jesus' decision to lay down his life for his beliefs caused him great stress. Yet he proceeded anyway, knowing the good it would bring to the world. In the very first section of his script, Schrader has subtly established a recurring theme: martyrdom, and all with just a single conspicuous capital A. Apart from the troubled protagonist, many other elements from Taxi Driver repeat themselves here. Chapter-like headings, narration via journal, minimal dialogue, and many other examples that I'll point out as we continue through the script. Why do these similarities occur? Because, functionally, these techniques are needed to serve the same purpose. The chapter-like headings are used to clearly demark new phases of Toller's mental journey. The narration via journal is still needed to provide insight into Toller's mindset that he wouldn't share with the people around him. And the minimal dialogue is a result of Toller's characterization and the film's tone: dark, gloomy, brooding. These technical similarities aren't just introduced to make First Reformed like Taxi Driver, rather they're symptomatic of the similarities in theme across the two films. Getting back to the journal, Toller seeks a connection with God. He wants to create a completely honest account of his thoughts and events. As he puts it, when writing about oneself, one should show no mercy. Who are you hiding from? God? Toller sees his journal as a form of prayer. He hopes, through this exercise, to achieve some form of enlightenment via reflection. This is incredibly similar to the purpose of transcendental style. As Toller reflects upon his own feelings, so too should we reflect on how these feelings arise in ourselves. The opening section of the script establishes Toller as lacking purpose. The biggest event in his life is the approach of the 250th anniversary reconsecration service for First Reformed Church. His church is essentially run by the megachurch Abundant Life, which funds First Reformed and keeps Toller under its thumb. He keeps his only potential love interest, Esther, at arm's length. He spends his nights holed up in his dark parsonage drinking booze. In other words, Toller doesn't have much going on. Schrader establishes this early on with a series of still life tableaus that depict Toller's room. Like in Taxi Driver, Schrader uses the styling of the protagonist's private room as an illustration of their mind. In Toller's case, his books are searching for spirituality across various religions, while the mini pharmacy of drugs attempts to suppress his existential pain with physical treatments. Toller is craving meaning in his life. Enter Mary and Michael, a young couple seeking counsel on a huge decision. Michael is an environmental activist on compassionate release from jail because Mary is pregnant. Michael is a doomsayer of sorts. His obsession with climate change has brought him to the conclusion that it's too late for us to save the Earth. As Mary puts it,
He thinks it's wrong to bring a child into this world. He wants to kill our baby.
the couple seeks Toller's counsel on the matter, declining the advice of ministers at Abundant Life because
He thinks it's more of a company than a church.
Michael is obviously highly opinionated, passionate, and willing to fight for a cause, exactly the force that Toller needs to shake him out of his spiritual stupor. Toller's meeting with Michael inspires him. The two engage in a tete-a-tete on morality, despair, and perseverance. Michael lays out his case, stressing not only to Toller but to the audience the importance and urgency of his cause.
And this isn't in some distant future. You will live to see this.
On the surface, Tola and Michael parley about the sanctity of life, the morality of abortion, and which action is the lesser of two evils. But Tola calls Michael out. His anger at society, his desire to abort Mary's baby, is really a manifestation of his fear.
Look, this is it's not about your baby. It's not about Mary. It's about you. And your despair, your lack of hope. Look, people throughout history, have woken up in the dead of the night, confronted by blackness. The sense that our lives are without meaning. Sickness unto death.
Tola isn't just trying to convince Michael, he is asserting these ideas in his own mind. He understands Michael's fear because he has experienced it himself after the loss of his son. Finally, that suffering is being given purpose. Tola is using it to help Michael.
I felt like I was Jacob wrestling all night long with the angel, fighting in the grasp. Every sentence, every question, every response a mortal struggle. It was exhilarating.
Tola has been wading through despair, and now he is given the opportunity to grasp at hope. The conclusion of their discussion is the basis for the film's thesis, the nature of hope and despair. This section messes with my mind, but I'll try to explain it as best I can. Tola rattles off this monologue. It comes down to choice. We choose hope or despair. We cannot avoid choosing. We are not free to decide. It's what we truly are.
Courage is the solution to despair. Reason provides no answers. We can't know what the future will bring. We have to choose despite uncertainty. Wisdom is holding two contradictory truths in our mind simultaneously. Hope and despair. A life without despair is a life without hope. Holding these two ideas in our head is life itself.
There's so much to unpack here. Let's start with the easy stuff, the way Tola speaks. He sounds self-assured, certain of his message. He sounds like a priest, preaching truth. His monologue feels homiletic. Each statement he makes seems intelligent and reasoned. But when you contrast some of his statements, cracks begin to show. He states that the wise person holds both contradictory thoughts in their head at once. But ironically, this seems to contradict his earlier point that we are one or the other. I reached two potential conclusions when rereading this passage. Conclusion number one suggests that the very fact that Tola contradicts himself is entirely the point, that to understand his point, you need to hold his contradictory suggestions in your mind at the same time. That whilst we are able to choose hope or despair, we are inclined towards one or the other, and that accepting our inclination while chasing the opposing force makes us wise. I just said that out loud and it still doesn't fully make sense to me. Conclusion number two is that Schrader purposely made Tola contradict himself to demonstrate that Tola himself doesn't quite know what he's talking about. He has these vague ideas of hope and despair learned from all his spiritual texts and self-reflection, but he hasn't been able to resolve these ideas, to distill them into a meaningful form. Certainly, this is supported by the agony with a capital A that we see in Tola's private moments. I'd make the case that it's also supported by the exchange directly following Tola's monologue. Michael asks if Tola is a drinking man, to which he replies, it doesn't help. Consciously, he knows it doesn't help, yet he drinks like a fish anyway. His actions don't match his words. He's confused. Perhaps this is a case of the blind leading the blind. Tola even acknowledges the contradictions between his actions and words soon afterwards as well.
Despair is a development of pride so great that it chooses one's certitude rather than admit God is more creative than we are.
Here, he references a quote by theologian and writer Merton. Despair is the absolute extreme of self-love. It is reached when a person deliberately turns his back on all help from anyone else in order to taste the rotten luxury of knowing himself to be lost. As stated earlier, and as we'll see repeat throughout the film, Tola consistently rejects help from Esther, Elder, and abundant life. He has a sick desire to relish in his own misery. Tola urinates into the toilet. His urine runs dark brown.
Who am I to talk about pride?
The next sequence of the film addresses the commercialization of religion as embodied by abundant life. Tola advertises the merchandise on sale at the church, a small selection of the much larger gift shop we see later at Abundant Life, and a visitor makes a dirty joke about a minister and the choir mistress.
Did you hear the one about the choir mistress and the minister?
No.
She chased him around the church and caught him by the organ.
This precedes the introduction of Jeffers, a pastor at Abundant Life who seems friendly enough.
I mean, it's been a while since we've talked. You know, even a pastor needs a pastor.
But he also undermines the reverence of the hymn A Mighty Fortress is Our Lord by imitating Martin Luther writing the song while taking a dump.
Mighty fortress.
I think every seminarian knows that one.
Oh, man, I cannot get that image out of my mind. I mean, whenever I see that song going on and I can look around the congregation and know everybody's thinking the same thing. This man, oh, goodness.
On the whole, Jeffers seems well-meaning, and he is interested in spreading the word of the Lord, but he often treats religion like a business. The kids at Abundant Life even call First Reformed Church the souvenir shop. In Jeffers' eyes, converts are customers. Tola sits down with Esther and is strikingly indifferent to her.
You need someone to take care of you.
Esther, we tried that. I'm not made for that.
Despite how deeply she cares about him, he shuns her help. Perhaps he feels like this is pity, and Tola already has enough self-pity as it is.
They are called because of their all-consuming knowledge of the emptiness of all things that can only be filled by the presence of our Savior.
As stated earlier, he knows how desperately he needs connection, yet he denies help. Tola is a victim of his own pride. As the next turn of events unfolds, Tola starts to realize this depressive self-attention and begins editing his journal to deny this truth.
My petty ailments have made me bad-tempered. I fight the urge not to write down the thoughts which come to my mind.
Mary informs Tola that Michael has been hiding a suicide vest in the garage, and when Michael realizes he's been found out, he takes his own life. Tola struggles to make sense of Michael's sacrifice, feeling guilt over his counsel. He attempts to erase these negative thoughts from his journal, the journal which was meant to be an honest account.
I'm going to tear these pages out. This journal brings me no peace. Self-pity. Nothing more.
Tola drags himself out of this pity by taking up Michael's cause. At Michael's funeral, he recites Job chapter 38 verse 2.
And said, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations, marked out its dimensions, laid its cornerstone?"
He goes on to speak of the glory of God's creation, Earth. Tola is taking a stand against the ignorance of businesses that would pollute the environment. Even after meeting Edward Belk and being strong-armed into complying with his demands, Tola still feels his soul has been lightened. He rides bikes through the park with Mary, out of the claustrophobic confines of his parsonage and out into nature. Tola smiles for the first time. This bittersweet acknowledgement by Schrader, said on its own line and put in bold, emphasizes the importance of this moment. Tola is finally given joy by having purpose. I'll fast forward through the next part of the script, as Tola takes a morbid interest in Michael's suicide vest and learns that he has stomach cancer. The wheels have already been set in motion, and much of this part of the script justifies Tola's decision to become a martyr.
Are you in pain now?
No, I feel good.
This descent into martyrdom is one of the strongest links to Taxi Driver. Schrader uses some visual similarities to demonstrate this point. The Pepto in the scotch calls back to the fizzing tablet in Taxi Driver. Pink viscous fluid diffuses through clear amber. The next scene is one of the strangest in the film, possibly matched only by the ending. Mary visits Tola and describes this incredible dread that's come over her. To relieve this dread, Tola and Mary engage in a kind of meditation called the Magical Mystery Tour. And here, Schrader exploits the techniques of Transcendental style for maximum impact. By withholding so much from the audience for the entire duration, this sequence feels so much more surreal. In the script, Schrader shows this by finally using capitals for key mystical words. Levitate, rotate, parsonage falls away, float. In the film, Schrader has more tools at his disposal. He holds on the image of Tola and Mary breathing face to face for an abnormally long period of time, then zooms out and introduces an otherworldly score the likes of which has not been heard the whole film. We are forced to reflect on the themes of the film. The magical mystery tour is not just meditation for Tola and Mary, it's for us too. For me personally, that quote about wisdom being the ability to hold two contradictory thoughts in your head simultaneously came flooding back. We have the juxtaposition between the splendor of nature and the horror of pollution. We also have the contrast of Tola with stomach cancer, despair, touching his stomach to Mary's pregnant belly, growing a new life, hope. The two thoughts together with human contact allow Tola to achieve his enlightenment. Tola has experienced his first real taste of hope, but the question remains if this is enough to stop his plan, to self-destruct at the reconsecration service, killing the higher-ups of Abundant Life and Edward Bulk. His fate seems sealed. It's in Tola's nature to seek self-destruction. As Jeffers puts it,
"You're always in the garden." Even Jesus wasn't always in the garden, on his knees sweating blood. He was on the mount. He was in the marketplace. He was in the temple. But you're always in the garden. For you, every hour is the darkest hour.
Directly addressing Tola's capital A agony. Tola is righteous, but he chooses to wallow in despair. He represents Jesus' morality in the most morose way possible. Mary is the only person capable of stopping this. Despite Tola's insistence that Mary not attend the reconsecration, Mary shows up anyway. Tola is forced to abandon his plan. He can't kill her. He resorts to his backup plan instead, wrapping himself in barbed wire, piercing his skin with metal and choking his body, a not so subtle comment on the effect of industry on our planet. But the barbed wire also represents Jesus' crown of thorns, suffering for sacrifice. Tola has completed his journey to martyrdom and, to kill himself, prepares to drink Drano. But then Mary enters. He drops the Drano. He rushes to her, and they hold each other. For the final scene, Schrader has kept one trick up his sleeve. The camera moves for the first time. This passionate release of emotion between the two of them is so different from any other interaction we've seen throughout the film. Tola responds to her carnal embrace in kind, devouring her. And then, the film just ends. The common debate here is, did Tola actually see Mary in time to save himself? Or did he die, and this is just a spiritual experience? For my part, I believe Tola died. The sudden spinning of the camera, the lack of blood on his alb, Mary inexplicably entering the parsonage that was supposedly locked, and the fact that Mary uses his first name, Ernst, which has never been said before in the script, all suggest to me that this is a fantasy. Interesting side note, Ernst Tola is also the name of a German playwright who was exiled from Nazi Germany for his art. He later committed suicide in a hotel and laid out photos of Spanish children that had been killed by fascist bombs. It's not too hard to see the point that Schrader is trying to make here. Yeesh. So, in death, Tola achieves release from his suffering and takes the burden of the world upon himself. That should be a good ending, right? But it feels empty. Tola was miserable. His life was empty. He lost his son to war and his wife as a result. He rejected human connection, doubted himself, thought himself to be prideful, and resented himself for it. It reminds me of that line from Taxi Driver. I don't believe that one should devote their life to morbid self-attention. Tola certainly commits this sin, and pays the price for it. Schrader cleverly uses Transcendental style to emphasize these moments of reflection that Tola has, where he worries over every action and thought of his life. In the script for Taxi Driver, Schrader achieved this effect by loading the action text with emotive asides that described Travis's mindset. In the script for First Reformed, however, Schrader forgoes the use of these asides in favor of shorter lines. Schrader has constructed this script knowing that he will direct it. He already has in his mind those long shots, the quiet moments that are emblematic of Transcendental style. As a result, the script is quite short compared with the film, only 88 pages compared with the runtime of 113 minutes. The common themes across Schrader's works inform his screenwriting technique.
And when you talk about the kind of signature movies that I'm known for, which is these solitary man kind of movies, and I've done one about every 10 years or so, and you can't do more than that. You, as your life progresses, and as you face different circumstances, you find yourself returning back to certain characters and see where they fit in this new constellation of experience.
These solitary man films require an intense investigation of the protagonist's mindset, a thorough rummaging around to see what makes them tick. Schrader's screenwriting style is tuned to draw this out. The words explore thoughts, feelings, motivation, doubts, hopes, fears, and ingrained notions of oneself. Taxi Driver is a young man's film about loneliness, human connection, whilst First Reformed is an old man's film about legacy, what we leave for future generations. Schrader's hallmark is introspection through text, and that will be his legacy. Good writing and good luck.